The clock struck midnight, and there was a quiet thud as an envelope slipped through the mail slot. I froze in place, the book on my lap dropping to the floor. For the preceding 7 years, this precise moment had occurred in the same way. An unmarked package, its contents foreshadowing events that would alter my destiny. Every forecast, no matter how implausible, came true. The first letter came on my 21st birthday. "Your best friend will betray you," the message said. I brushed it off at the time, but 2 months later I discovered Emily stealing from my apartment, her expression a combination of guilt and defiance. The following letters predicted anything from career advancements to unanticipated disasters. By the 4th year, I had stopped questioning their correctness and instead focused on their origin. Despite my best efforts, I was always unsuccessful in locating the sender. As I neared the front door, I felt a familiar sense of discomfort. The envelope lay on the floor, spotless and white, as if it had appeared out of thin air. My hand shook as I lifted it, the weight of the contents pushing on my chest. This year's letter seemed heavy, as if it contained more than simply words. The seal broke with disturbing ease, and I unfolded the solitary piece of paper within. The note was short, its handwriting oddly familiar but difficult to place. "At midnight tomorrow, you must go to the abandoned church on Blackthorn Road. There, you will discover the answers you seek, but only if you are ready to pay the price." A shiver went down my spine. Unlike earlier letters, which just outlined future events, this one was a mandate, an option. The words seemed to pulsate on the paper, taunting me to disobey. I read the message numerous times, looking for hidden meanings or clues, but there was nothing left to comprehend. I hardly slept that night since my head was racing with possibilities. What responses might the church have? And how much would I have to pay? By daybreak, tiredness had given way to resolution. I needed to know. The day dragged on interminably, with each tick of the clock increasing my dread. As midnight neared, I drove along Blackthorn Road, a short lane cloaked in darkness and solitude. The abandoned chapel loomed ahead, its form ragged in the moonlight sky. Its once pristine walls were now worn and cracked, and the stained glass windows had shattered, leaving sparkling pieces like unfulfilled promises. I stopped the vehicle and approached the huge oak doors, their surface bent from age. They creaked open with a hesitant moan, exposing a vast room engulfed by darkness. The air within was dense and wet, with the faint odor of rotting. My footsteps reverberated as I moved further, my headlamp piercing through the stifling blackness. In the midst of the nave was a single wooden table with another envelope on it. This one was black, with a scarlet and waxy seal that looked like congealed blood. My hand shook as I opened it and took out a folded piece of paper. The message was chillingly plain. "The answers you seek will be at the expense of your history. If you continue, enter the confession booth." My flashlight dimmed as I turned to face the confession booth, its shadowy form just discernible in the church's corner. It seemed like the air surrounding it was denser, charged with an invisible force that made my skin crawl. I paused, the weight of the choice bearing down on me. My past? What may this mean? What would it mean to lose it? But curiosity and a deep need for closure overcame my anxiety. I walked inside the booth, and the door creaked shut behind me. The little chamber was cramped, and the wooden walls were carved with symbols I couldn't identify. The air was oppressive, and for a second I thought I couldn't breathe. "Do you wish to proceed?" a deep booming voice inquired. It came from everywhere and nowhere, like if the church was speaking. "Yes," I muttered, barely audible. The world altered. It was not like falling asleep or losing awareness. I was in the booth one instant, and then stood at a place that defied description. The earth under me was smooth and black, reflecting a sky filled with hues beyond imagination. Figures glided in the distance, their shapes fluid and constantly shifting. The air hummed with a sound that was neither a hum nor stillness. "You seek answers," the voice said, this time from exactly behind me. I turned to confront a shadowy figure. Its aspects were ambiguous, as if reality refused to define them. "Who are you?" I inquired, my voice wavering. "A guide," it answered. "You have been looking for the origins of the letters and the meaning behind the messages. The solutions are available, but they come at a cost." "What is the cost?" I urged, my terror turning to fury. The apparition lifted a hand, and the turbulent sky above us transformed to reveal images from my life. Memories ran out like a film reel. My youth, the people I'd lost, the victories and failures that had created me. "To know the truth," the figure said, "you must let go of the burdens of your past, your memories, identity, and overall feeling of self." I glanced at the photographs above, heartbroken at the prospect of losing them. But underlying the anguish was a hunger, a need to comprehend the power that had shaped my existence for the last 7 years. "And if I refuse?" I asked. "You will leave this location untouched," the figure said, "but the letters will remain. They will torment and influence you until you can no longer tell where they stop and you begin." The option was impossible. My history defined me, but the letters engulfed me. I couldn't return to a life guided by an invisible hand. "I accept," I answered, my voice firm despite the panic gripping my chest. The figure nodded, and the sky above cracked, splintering memories into shards of light. They dropped around me and vanished into the dark earth. I felt intense, burning agony, like if bits of me were being peeled away. And suddenly there was quiet. When I opened my eyes, I was standing outside the chapel, the chilly night air on my skin. My automobile was still where I left it, but something was changed. The world felt lighter. My history no longer weighed on me, but neither did it seem familiar. I couldn't recall my name, where I lived, or why I'd come here. I just had one clear, compelling thought: wait for the next letter. The first rays of dawn appeared on the horizon, and I drove into the unknown, the faint hum of something old and dreadful resonating in the back of my head. The next letter was waiting somewhere, along with the following step into the abyss. Every morning, the ritual was the same. Anna awoke in her little, scarcely furnished apartment, her thinking as clear as a newly scrubbed slate. The elements of her existence were familiar: her name, her face in the mirror, the thin scar below her jawline. But no recollection of the previous day came to her. Initially, the amnesia was alarming. Now, there was a dismal acceptance. However, there was one exception. Every morning, a gift would come at her door, always unmarked, with an item that seemed both meaningful and exotic. This morning, the gift was waiting for her on the doorstep. It was smaller than usual, a simple white box sealed with tape. Anna gazed at it for a bit before carrying it inside, her heart racing. The process of unwrapping these parcels has become ceremonial. Each thing seemed like a breadcrumb on a trail she couldn't see, leading to a truth just beyond her grasp. Inside, there was just one key. It was ancient and hefty, like a lock from many decades ago. A rusty tag with fading lettering read, "Room 307. Anna brushed her fingertips over the cold metal as a weird feeling swept over her, like a whisper of déjà vu. The key was strange, but the number triggered something deep inside, a memory too distant to fathom. The things had always borne this weight, a snapshot of a guy she didn't know, but immediately dreaded. A locket with a woman's face carved within, her expression stuck in sadness. A blood-stained glove had pushed her into a state of dread that she couldn't understand. Each object seemed to be related to something essential, but the relevance remained frustratingly elusive. Dr. Greaves, Anna's therapist, had attempted to help her make sense of the parcels. "They could be projections of your subconscious," he said, his voice comforting but professional. "Your mind may be manifesting these objects as a way to trigger repressed memories." But Anna was not persuaded. The artifacts seemed too purposeful, too exact, to be the product of her own damaged brain. "Today," the key called her. With no additional indications, Anna started to follow the thread. A brief web search showed that the location on the tag was a historic hotel downtown that had long been transformed into low-income apartments. The building's outside was old, with its brick wall collapsing in parts, yet it exuded bleak determination. The foyer was poorly lighted, the air thick with mildew and faint traces of cigarette smoke. An uninterested clerk stared at Anna as she slid by, clutching the key securely in her palm. The elevator grumbled in protest as it transported her to the third story. its flickering light creating strange shadows across the walls. When she went out, the corridor stretched before her like a tunnel, with each door identical but for the tarnished brass numbers. Room 307 was located at the end of the passageway. Standing before it, Anna's chest clenched. She slipped the key into the lock, her fingers quivering, and turned it. The door cracked open to reveal a chamber trapped in time. The decor was old, the wallpaper was flaking, and every surface was covered in a thin coating of dust. But what piqued Anna's interest was the array of images sprawled over the bed. Each image depicted her. In one, she was laughing, her arm around a guy whose face had been intentionally wiped off. In others, she stood alone, her face emotionless, and her eyes empty. But it was the last shot that caused her knees to crumble. It showed her laying on the bed in front of her eyes closed, and a trickle of dried blood flowing down her temple. Anna's breath caught as shards of recollection rushed to the surface, jumbled and fleeting. She recalled the guy from the scratched-out photographs, his voice piercing and cutting. She recalled screaming, the feel of cold metal on her flesh, and the overpowering horror as blackness drew in. And then nothing. A noise behind her startled Anna out of her reverie. She swung around to see the door ajar, and a shadow moving just outside the frame. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice quivering. The shadow fled, and Anna followed, her bare feet smacking against the chilly floor as she sprinted down the corridor. The stranger vanished down a stairway, and Anna paused momentarily before following. The steps spiraled down into darkness, the air becoming colder with each step. She entered the basement, her breath apparent in the chilly air. The walls were lined with outdated storage lockers, with rusty and cracked metal doors. At the far end of the room, a guy stood with his back to her. He donned a black cloak and slumped his shoulders, as if under an excruciating weight. "Who are you?" Anna demanded, her voice booming across the enormous chamber. Anna's blood raced cold as the guy took a careful turn. It was the guy in the scratched-out photographs. His face was pale and haggard, his eyes sunken yet flaming with such intensity that Anna had to take a step back. "You shouldn't have come here," he continued, his tone low and gravelly. "Who are you?" Anna repeated, but the inquiry seemed empty. Deep down, she knew. "You already have the answer," he added, pointing to her pocket. Anna instantly groped for the key, the cold metal cutting into her hand. This is your doing," he said. "You wanted the truth, and now you have to face it." The room seemed to tilt, the air becoming heavier as memories smashed into Anna with unwavering power. She saw herself fighting with the guy, his voice rising in rage as he accused her of treason. She saw the glitter of a knife, the battle, and understood she would not survive. Then she saw him standing over her dead corpse, his face contorted with fury and anguish. "You killed me," Anna said quietly, the words feeling harsh on her mouth. The guy nodded with an inscrutable face. "You made me," he said, "and now you're trapped here just like I am." "Trapped?" Anna repeated, her uncertainty mixed with terror. "This place, it's not real," the guy said. "It's a memory, a jail of your own creation. Every day, you wake up and forget because you are unable to confront what has occurred. But the items are fragments of the truth, attempting to burst through." Anna's thoughts whirled. Was this her damnation, a never-ending cycle of forgetting and remembering? The pieces started to come together, but the image they created was too disturbing to comprehend. "How do I escape?" she said, her voice tinged with despair. The man's expression softened, and she saw a glimpse of sadness in his eyes. "You have to let go," he said, "of the guilt, of the anger, of me." Anna closed her eyes, the weight of his words falling on her. Although her recollections were fragmented, she knew enough. She had been deceived and killed by someone she had previously trusted. But clinging to the grief had kept her locked in this loop, a mute witness to her own agony. When she opened her eyes, the guy had left, and the basement was empty. The key in her palm seemed heavier than ever, but she now knew why. It wasn't a tool for opening doors. It was a symbol, a reminder that she has the ability to liberate herself. Anna ascended the stairs and went back to room 307. The images were gone, and the room seemed strangely silent. She put the key on the bed and took a step back, her pulse hammering. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm. The room became blurry, with the walls fading into light. Anna felt relieved for the first time, as if a heavy burden had been removed. She was finally free as the cycle came to an end. Anna awoke the following morning to find the gift ready for her, as it usually is. However, this time, the box was empty. The road to Larkspur Village was narrow and twisting, surrounded by lush woodlands that appeared to become closer the farther I drove. My phone's GPS had broken miles ago, leaving me to navigate by fading signage that came intermittently along the gravel road. Something about the place's remoteness seemed unsettling, yet it just increased my interest. Larkspur didn't appear on any current map, and the few references I discovered online were hazy, describing an idyllic, self-sufficient town tucked deep in the countryside. I was a journalist looking for stories, and this was meant to be a fascinating human interest article. Instead, it descended into the unexplained. I came in late afternoon. The settlement emerged from the woods, like a remnant from another time. Stone houses with thatched roofs, dotted cobblestone lanes, and gas lights provided a pleasant glow despite the bright sunshine above. The air smelled of soil and wood smoke, and distant laughing could be heard faintly on the wind. It was beautiful, almost too perfect, like walking into a postcard. However, something about it seemed odd. I parked my vehicle near the town center and got out, my boots crunching on the gravel. A group of youngsters played nearby, their laughter echoing as they skipped rope. An elderly lady swept her porch, her efforts steady and somewhat robotic. A guy in a tweed jacket lifted his hat to me as he walked by, his grin pleasant but vacuous. "Welcome to Larkspur," said the voice behind me. I turned to see a lady in her 40s with her auburn hair nicely pulled back. She wore a plain frock and an apron, and her hands were covered with flour. "Thank you," I answered with a grin. "It's beautiful here." "It is," she acknowledged, her voice nice but bland. "We don't get many tourists. Are you passing through?" "I'm a journalist," I clarified. "I'm writing about unique communities, and your village caught my attention." Her grin faded for a short minute before returning. "I see. I hope you enjoy your visit. The innkeeper at the Red Lantern can provide you a place for the night." Before I could ask for her name, she turned and walked away, walking inside a neighboring bakery. Her hasty departure disturbed me, but I put it up to small-town idiosyncrasies. Following her advice, I went to the Red Lantern Inn, a lovely stone structure with ivy covering its walls. The innkeeper, a wiry guy with a bushy mustache, kindly welcomed me. "Welcome. We don't get many visitors. How long will you be staying?" "Just a night or two," I said, signing the guest book. As I flipped through the pages, I saw something strange. The last documented visitor had stayed nearly 50 years earlier. "Quiet place, isn't it?" the innkeeper explained, handing a key over the counter. "This is room 3, top of the stairs." The accommodation was basic yet cozy, with furnishings as timeless as the hamlet itself. After unpacking, I went back outdoors, camera in hand, ready to explore. The folks were pleasant yet aloof, their chats courteous but without substance. They all looked to be doing something, tending gardens, mending clothing, cleaning streets, but their activities were strangely identical. Everything seemed too synced and rehearsed. As darkness arrived, I discovered something even stranger. The lighting in the village did not alter. The sun lingered continuously on the horizon, producing an amber light that neither faded nor brightened. Despite the constant brightness, the gas lights flickered on, and the people went about their business as if time had stood still. "Excuse me," I said to an old guy seated on a bench near the plaza. "Is there a clock tower or anything nearby? I'm attempting to gain a sense of time." He stared up at me with big, watery eyes. "Time?" he repeated, as if the term were unfamiliar. "Yes," I said, terrified. "What time is it?" He cocked his head, a vacuous grin forming over his lips. "It's always the same time here, dear." A shiver went down my spine. Before I could continue, a bell rang from the direction of the church. The boom was powerful and resonant, and the people immediately halted what they were doing. They turned toward the sound, their actions seemingly synced, and started marching toward the church. Even the youngsters abandoned their games. their faces lifeless as they entered the building. My instincts shouted at me to escape, but I was anchored in place and forced to continue. The church was tiny, yet impressive, with a stone exterior covered with aged sculptures. Inside, the air was thick with incense, and the people packed the seats in quiet. At the front stood a person in black robes, their face concealed by a hood. They raised their hands, and the room went silent. "The day renews," the person said, their voice resonating strangely. "Just as it always has, as it always will." The peasants answered uniformly, their voices lifeless and soulless. "The day renews." I snuck out of the church, my heart racing. Something went really wrong here. I raced back to the inn, determined to leave right away, but when I got to my vehicle, I saw the tires were slashed and the motor had died. Panic came in when I realized I was imprisoned. The next morning, I awoke to find the town precisely as it had been the day before. The same persons performed the same jobs in the same way. It seemed as if the previous day had never occurred. The sole indication that time had gone was a message placed under my door. "The curse binds us all. Break it or join us." The words made me shudder. I spent the day looking for answers, putting together bits of overheard conversations and enigmatic comments. The peasants seemed ignorant of their situation, their memories refreshed with each new day. Only the hooded person in the church seemed to be immune, their mysterious presence serving as a continual reminder of the village's strange existence. I returned to the chapel that evening, ready to meet the apparition. The bell rung as the peasants assembled, their lifeless features unsettling in their monotony. This time I did not sit in the pews. I approached the altar, my voice quivering as I sought an explanation. "What is this place?" I asked. "Why is everyone trapped here?" The person turned to me and lowered their hood. Their faces were pallid and expressionless, and their eyes were like twin nothingness. "You should not have come," they said. "Now you too are bound." "How do I break the curse?" I demanded, desperation seeping into my tone. The figure pointed to the stained glass window behind the altar, which depicted a snake swallowing its own tail. "The cycle feeds on fear and ignorance," they warned. "To break it, you must face the truth you fear most." Before I could react, the villagers turned toward me, their faces expressionless but their motions methodical. They started to advance, their aggregate presence stifling. I pulled away, the weight of their implied threat pushing on me. "What truth?" I yelled, my voice breaking. "What am I supposed to do?" The figure's void-like eyes seemed to bore through me. "Look within," they advised. "Only then will the path reveal itself." The people drew closer, and darkness devoured me. I awoke in my inn room, sweating profusely. The hamlet was calm, and the day seemed to have remained unaltered. But something inside me had moved. I could feel the weight of the figure's words, their enigmatic meaning nagging at my thoughts. I spent the day exploring the town, looking for the elusive truth that would set me free. By dusk, I was back at the church. The cycle was about to start again, but this time I was prepared. I stood at the altar looking at the snake in the stained glass and whispering, "I'm not afraid." The chamber rocked and the glass cracked, sending the serpent's bits flying like shards of light. The peasants halted, their blank looks fading as awareness returned to their eyes. The cloaked person let out a guttural scream as their shape faded into darkness. Then quiet. The folks glanced about, confused and relieved expressions on their faces. The sun eventually set, bringing the community into darkness for the first time in decades. I staggered outdoors. The weight of the curse eased, but the memories of what I had gone through remained forever carved in my memory. As I left Larkspur Village and saw the road ahead of me, I couldn't escape the sense that some of the darkness had followed me. The reality I had confronted was freeing, but it had also left its imprint on me. And when the sun fell below the horizon, I realized I'd never be the same. The discovery of the old stuffed rabbit on the floor of my childhood bedroom served as the first indication that something was awry. Its tattered cloth and button eyes were as recognizable as my own mirror, although I hadn't seen it in almost 20 years. The sight of it sent shivers down my spine, not because of the toy, but because of what it symbolized. The bunny belonged to Henry, my imaginary pal. Returning to my childhood home was bittersweet. After my parents died, it was my obligation to sift through their stuff. The home remained intact, a remnant from my boyhood stuck in time. My mother always enjoyed the subtle fragrance of lavender, the same creaking staircase and fading wallpaper. But as I strolled through its rooms, the home started to seem less like a pleasant recollection and more like a place I didn't quite know. Strange sounds resonated through the silence. Soft murmurs in empty corridors, the creak of floors where no one stood. At first I rejected them, supposing they were caused by an ancient home collapsing into its foundations. But when I discovered the rabbit, long-buried memories resurfaced. Henry had been my constant friend as a youngster. He wasn't like my previous imagined buddies. He seemed genuine in a manner I couldn't define. I recall his cheeky smile, his strange, otherworldly laugh, and how he always appeared to know things I didn't. He would tell me about the house's hidden crawl spaces, wobbly floorboards, and even once showed me a little door in the attic that I'd never seen before. I used to leave the bunny for him as a gift, something to keep him company while I was not present. But as I got older, Henry's presence lessened, as if he had just vanished into the background of my upbringing. Until now. I took up the rabbit, its fabric stiff with age, and a sense of fear flooded over me. That night, as I laid on my old bed, the house seemed to come alive. The murmurs became louder and more forceful, and I believe I heard my name shouted from far away. "Emily, come play." I bolted upright, my heart racing. The voice was weak yet clear. It was Henry's voice, just as I recalled. I tried to tell myself it was all a dream, but the following morning, I saw muddy tracks heading from the front entrance to the attic stairs. The attic door was ajar, and the sight of it struck me with an unfathomable sense of dread. I ascended the stairs, each creak of the wood reverberating through the lonely home. The attic was exactly as I had left it, dusty, crowded with old crates, and poorly illuminated by a solitary lamp. But something was different. The little door Henry had showed me in the far corner was suddenly open, exposing a dark, tight hallway that had not before existed. "Emily," the voice said, this time louder and closer. I froze, every instinct screaming for me to flee. But something urged me to go onward. The hallway was chilly and wet, with narrowing walls that forced me to kneel to proceed. At the end, I discovered a little chamber. A wooden box stood in the middle, and the words "You forgot me" were etched into the floor next to it. My breath caught as I opened the package. Inside was a collection of items I hadn't seen in years, including a hair ribbon, a marble, and a painting I created when I was 6. They were all items I'd shared with Henry as mementos of our relationship. But behind them, I saw something unfamiliar, an image. It depicted a little youngster, no more than 7, standing in front of my home. He had the same naughty smile and piercing eyes. It was Henry. However, he was not a figment of the imagination. He had been genuine. The understanding struck me like a thunderclap. Henry had been a youngster, like me, but why did I recall him as being otherworldly? The whispers returned, louder this time, and filled the room with a cacophony of voices. "You forgot. You forgot." I lurched back and clutched the image. The walls appeared to close in, and for a brief time, I believed I saw Henry standing at the doorway. His smile twisted into something sinister. "You left me here," he replied, his tone low and accusatory. "Henry?" I muttered, my voice shaking. "What happened to you?" "You forgot," he reiterated. "But I didn't. I waited for you, Emily. I waited so long." Memories started to come back, remnants of a day that I had hidden deep inside my mind. Henry and I had been playing in the attic, investigating the little door that he had discovered. I recalled his enthusiasm and assurance that there was something great on the other side. But when I crept inside the door, something had changed. There was a tumble, a call for aid, and then nothing. I had fled, too afraid to tell anybody what had occurred, and somehow I had persuaded myself that Henry didn't exist. The murmurs became louder, and the air in the room became colder. Henry moved closer, his figure flashing like a flame. "You left me here," he said, his voice cracking. "You have to make it right." "How?" I asked, tears flowing down my cheeks. He pointed to the box. "Take it. Remember me." I grabbed the box in my arms and escaped the attic, the muttering following me down the stairs. That night I was sitting in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the contents of the box. I lay them out on the floor, each representing a piece of the puzzle. As I combed through the recollections, I started to comprehend. Henry wasn't stuck in the home. He was stuck in my head, a component of my shame and anxiety that had taken on a life of its own. However, as the night progressed, the distinction between memory and reality became less clear. Shadows moved in the corners of the room, and whispers became louder and more urgent. I understood Henry didn't want to reconcile. He wanted retribution. The house itself appeared to tremble with his rage, the walls groaning and the flooring crumbling under me. "You can't leave," his voice growled, reverberating in all directions. "You're mine now." I grabbed the rabbit and the image, hugging them closely as I dashed towards the door. But the home wouldn't let me go. The walls twisted, the passageways stretched forever, and no matter which direction I went, I always ended up in the attic. Henry's laughter boomed about me, a sound that was both innocent and frighteningly sinister. "You forgot me," he said, his voice becoming louder. "Now you'll stay with me." Desperate, I went back to the little door. The chamber beyond it was now empty, with the box gone, but the words carved into the floor shone dimly in the dark. I knelt down and positioned the rabbit and photos in the middle of the room. "I'm sorry, Henry," I said quietly. "I'm so sorry." The whispering ceased, and for a brief period the house went quiet. Then, gradually, the walls shifted, enlarging the corridor until I could see the faint shine of sunlight. I slid through, emerging into the attic just as the first rays of morning appeared through the shattered windows. That morning I left the home and locked the door behind me. The rabbit and the portrait stayed in the little chamber, a reminder of a youngster who had been forgotten but not gone. As I drove away, I felt Henry's presence ease, but his words persisted in my thoughts. "Don't forget me again." I never returned to that place, but in the quiet hours before sleep, I can still hear him saying my name. It started innocuously, as most uncomfortable events do. I first saw it on a typical Tuesday, the type of day that blends in with countless others. As I got ready for work, the early light shone through my apartment window, leaving a sharp shadow on the wooden floor. At first it was subtle, a flicker of motion that did not correspond to mine. I turned my head expecting to witness a light trick, but my shadow remained still, precisely reflecting myself. I dismissed it as sleep-deprived paranoia and proceeded about my day. However, the abnormalities continued to multiply over the following several days. When I grabbed for a cup or moved my head, my shadow would trail after me by a fraction of a second. When I stopped to observe it, it froze in position, as if pretending innocence. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I was overthinking it and allowing my imagination to take over. But I sensed there was something wrong. Not until a week later did the texts start. That morning, while brushing my teeth, I saw the words, "Look closely," scribbled in jagged black lettering across the mirror, but they weren't there. The words were inscribed into the outline of my shadow, darker than the rest of the gloom. I lurched backward, my heart beating in my chest. When I blinked, the message had vanished, leaving just my frightened image looking back. The discomfort that had descended on me was unshakable. I became hyper-aware of my shadow, observing it from the corner of my eye as I went about my days. The messages persisted, usually short and cryptic. "Not alone. Listen, it's coming." Each time the words appeared for a little second, visible only to me, before disappearing into nothingness. I started to doubt my sanity. Was I hallucinating? Had I spent too many restless nights buried in coffee and stress? I kept my secrets to myself for fear of seeming insane. But as I disregarded the warnings, they got more insistent. My shadow became more confident, moving autonomously while I wasn't watching. I once caught it reaching for something on the kitchen counter with my hands at my sides. Another time it ran across the wall, reaching incredibly far, as if attempting to escape the limits of its body. One night, I woke up to find my room drenched in a strange pale light. The curtains were drawn, yet the shadows on the walls appeared to move, like living ink. My shadow hovered over me, greater than it should have been, and the message was clear. Help me. The words imprinted themselves on my consciousness, and for the first time, I felt anything other than terror. Whatever was going on, my shadow did not intend to hurt me. It tried to communicate. The next day, I determined to tackle it. In the low light of my living room, I stood in front of the biggest blank wall I could locate, creating a vivid shadow on its surface. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The shadow paused and then moved. It lifted its arm slowly and methodically, pointing toward the bookshelf, an action I did not replicate. I followed its instructions, plucking books off the shelf in bewilderment. I flung them aside one by one until I discovered it, a dusty, leather-bound diary hidden under the others. It was not mine. I didn't recognize it, yet it seemed familiar, as if it had always been there. My hands shook as I opened it, showing pages covered with furious scrawls and bizarre figures. Throughout the mayhem, one slogan was repeated again and over: "The shadow knows." The notes included experiments, rituals, and warnings concerning a creature that resided in the shadows, feeding off its host's terror and misery. The writer, whomever they were, stated that the creature might be tied, even controlled, but only at a high cost. The last page included a disturbing warning. Do not let it overtake you. Do not believe the shadow, but it will guide you to the truth. My blood became chilly. The words seemed like they were addressed at me, even though I had no memory of composing them. I turned to see my shadow quivering on the wall, its edges ragged and disordered. "What truth?" I muttered while hugging the notebook to my chest. The shadow didn't respond. Instead, it started to move, expanding and contorting itself into the shape of a doorway. A wave of horror swept over me, but curiosity and a weird feeling of responsibility drove me onward. I went into the gloom, and the world vanished around me. I found myself in a region of never-ending darkness, the air thick and oppressive. Shapes danced about the edges, indistinct and frightening, but never completely formed. My shadow loomed before me, no longer confined by my moves. It motioned for me to follow, and I followed, my footfall booming across the vacuum. We came to a gigantic obsidian rock that seemed to vibrate with electricity. Its surface was etched with innumerable symbols, some of which matched those in the notebook. My shadow pointed to the base of the rock, where an inscription shone faintly. "To free the bound, you must remember." "Remember what?" I demanded, but the shadow remained mute. Frustration bubbled within me. "Do you want my help? Tell me what to do." The monolith reacted instead. Its surface swirled like water, providing glimpses into my existence. I imagined myself as a youngster, conversing with an invisible buddy. I imagined evenings spent in horror, shadows dancing on my bedroom walls. And then I saw it, a hidden ceremony, a desperate binding spell. I'd done it. I'd imprisoned the thing in my shadow, attempting to confine and control it. However, in doing so, I formed an unbreakable bond. The shadow started to change, taking on a new shape. It was no longer my silhouette. It was the creature itself, massive and ominous, its presence oppressive. Its voice echoed across the vacuum, a deep growl that shook my bones. "You cannot undo what you have done," it remarked, "but you can release me." "And what happens if I do?" I inquired, my tone barely above a whisper. "I will leave you," it said, "but the cost will be great." The journal's admonition rang in my mind. Do not let it consume you. However, here I was, presented with a decision that provided no apparent escape. Either I unleashed the thing and risked the chaos it may cause, or I continued to exist as its host, gradually losing myself to its power. "What is the cost?" I inquired. "Your light," it responded. "You will never cast a shadow again." The concept had grave consequences. Losing my shadow meant losing a piece of myself, a connection to the natural world. However, the alternative seemed inconceivable. I nodded, summoning all of my bravery. "Do it," I instructed. The creature rushed forward, immersing me in darkness. Pain ripped through me, like if my whole existence was being torn apart. I yelled, and the sound was absorbed by the nothingness. When the darkness faded, I returned to my flat, clutching the diary in my hands. The space seemed brighter than I recalled, with every nook lighted. I glanced down and saw nothing. No shadow spread out underneath me, and no silhouette tracked my movements. I was alone in the sunshine. The communication ceased after that. The home seemed calmer and the air was lighter. But I had changed. People avoided me for no apparent reason, as if I did not exist. And in the depths of my consciousness, I felt a tiny echo of the entity's existence, a reminder of the decision I'd taken. Some evenings, when the world is quiet, I gaze at the wall where my shadow used to be, wondering whether I made the right choice. The thing has vanished, yet its secret lingers, a shadow just out of grasp.